Hello. I did not play any particularly interesting games of RBY today, so you are getting a interesting, I hope, and helpful, I hope, big ol' rant on some concepts of game theory and all of that. I want to talk a little bit about this prediction guide that Hipmonly made 4 years ago, and what's good and what's bad, and all of those things. And I think I have a piece of advice and a fundamental simple concept that this prediction guide misses and that I think will help a lot of people. So let's talk about this guide. I will not read through it because I think, first of all, this guide is thorough, which is good. But the downside of being thorough is that it's also dense. If you are someone like me who does not really like theoretical mathematics all that much, I have a decent brain for calculation, but didn't go to university for this kind of shit. It's not, you don't need a degree to understand this, but still, he goes on for paragraphs and paragraphs that are really simple if you're really well versed into these kinds of things, but they're not easy to read through if you don't have training. And so what I want to do is try to simplify all of that for a start. So what does this guide actually talk about? It tries to explain the concept of Nash equilibria, and this concept is very important. What a Nash equilibrium is that in any position there will be a balance, there will be possible moves for each of the two players, and each player should make a certain move a certain amount of the time. And this is a very intuitive concept. If you've played Pokemon, you will know this. Your classic Tauros mind game. Sometimes you click Body Slam, and sometimes you click Hyper Beam. Sometimes you kill what's in front of you. Sometimes you try to hit the switch and that is trying to catch the Hyper Beam. Like, super simple concept. You should do both of those moves some amount of the time to play optimally. Because if you always Hyper Beam what's in front of you, then your opponent can obviously exploit you by always catching that Hyper Beam. So that is the basic concept of Nash equilibria. It's very simple. Everyone who has played Pokemon has an intuitive understanding of this. You should mix up your moves, otherwise you are predictable. And the concept of Nash equilibria is finding the exact number, the exact frequency with which you should click each move. So for example, the Hyper Beam that you click to kill what's in front of you, you probably should click it slightly less than 50% because it misses, or something like that. I mean, obviously it's hard to do a hypothetical because it's a very practical example that I'm trying to make. But anyways, that is the general idea. You have certain odds and you have certain rewards, and for example, if you give an approximation, well, to reach a true Nash equilibrium, you would need to find a true evaluation of each outcome. But if you give an approximate outcome, like for example here, Seismic Toss, it gives him a value of 12. If that value of 12 is accurate enough, then you will have, with some certain math, you will know how often you should click a given move. And that's all well and good. And then he goes on, and he explains, what about when there are 3 options, and what about mid-grounds, and what about, this and this and that. And that's correct. This guide is undoubtedly like very, very thorough and correct and helpful. But I think the part that this guide is missing is, there are 2 big concepts that this guide is missing. First of all, where do you get these numbers from? Where do you get this 12 and this -4 and this -3 and this 3? You are approximating a very complicated problem into a whole round number. And there is no human being and no computer, and there will never be any human being or any computer who will, well, maybe computers will get there eventually, but nobody will be able to get mathematical accuracy on those numbers. And so even if you know all the formulas that you can use to turn those numbers into good approximations, if the numbers themselves are fundamentally never going to be accurate, then to me this is kind of a waste of time. Like all the actual practical formulas, the mathematics that it goes into, you need an intuitive understanding of all of this stuff, of course. You need to understand that, if a move has a bigger reward, you should click it more often than a move with a smaller reward, and all of that. But this is stuff that you understand, that is, you don't need all of these numbers for. That's really my point. Because the practical mathematical implications of even trying to do all of this stuff, it's so inconceivable that you could simplify a game of Pokemon into accurate numbers like this. Like, nobody can do this. It's not going to happen. And so, to me, well, this is definitely a correct guide, and you could have, this is clearly someone who knows what they're talking about, who probably has studied game theory on a, like legitimately, unlike me, who just, reads about this and watches YouTube videos. But the problem here is, this is not, I just don't think this guide gives you a lot of practically helpful information. There's a lot to take away if you have never heard of these concepts, for sure. But I also think you get lost on paragraph 1 if you've never heard of these concepts. And so, I don't know, for me it was very hard to relate to this guide in particular. And so I want to make it simpler, and I want to give the same concepts in presented in another way. A much less scientific way, but I think no less valid, because our game is not scientific yet. We have not gotten there. First of all, these numbers. You can get an edge on other people if you have a more accurate approximation of what those numbers should be. So that's good. What you do with these numbers is also important. But I think a lot of people, if you take any high level game, pretty much whichever one you pick, you will find decision turns where you have to make a big decision, and the implications are very long-winded, and they will affect the rest of the game in the early or in the mid game. For example, whenever one player clicks explosion, they're making a decision with so many long-term consequences that if you can estimate those consequences correctly, you will gain a lead on other players. And that is not something that this guide talks about at all, because in a 2x2 matrix, yes, the numbers are helpful, the numbers are easy, the numbers are maybe even realistic in a simple endgame to put into practice. But a vast majority of in-game decisions, they are not this simple, and they are not even as simple as this, because these numbers, how do you get them? How do you get 10? How do you know it's not 9.4? You just can't. You just can't. There is no way. There is just no way to quantify everything accurately. But if you are more accurate than your opponent instinctively, then that will give you an edge on the long term. And so that's cool. That's good. If you've read all of this guide and you like it, and you are a bit miffed that I criticized it so much, then this would be my advice to you. You don't have to forget anything about this guide, because it's all correct stuff. It's mathematical. Hitmonlee knows what he's talking about. But also mind these numbers, because the big difference in a practical sense is estimating these situations correctly. Is this a 10 or is this a 9 or is this a 7? I think even high-level players routinely disagree on these evaluations. And obviously they don't talk about these evaluations in a mathematical sense. Like if you go and do game analysis, you will never see people say, "Oh, this line is a 10 in this graph." Like they will never bust out the graph, but they will say, "Oh, I think if you click this move, and if your opponent clicks this move, then I think that outcome is really good for you." And sometimes people will disagree. They will say, "No, this doesn't actually look so winning to me." And because the game situations are so complicated, you will have completely messed up graphs if you try to do a process like this. Because I mean, even top player all of the time, they just end up disagreeing on which lines are good and which lines are bad. Because the long-term implications of any given move are so complicated that you will just never use this. You will just, even if you understand this matrix, you will use this in endgames. You will not use this for the majority of the early game and mid game and team builder decisions also, because let's not forget that decisions are also made in the team builder. And this guide basically doesn't talk about how you can apply game theory in the team builder. And there is a lot of good stuff in this guide, especially after those tables, after the tables at the start, which I really don't think are useful. Everything else that comes afterwards is actually pretty helpful. Basically from stupid opponents onwards. Exactly, like basically this concept is something that I wish was at the start of the guide instead of in the middle. Because he goes on and on and on and on about Nash equilibria, and he says, okay, you should find Nash equilibria, and then the follow-up is, all it does is it guarantees that your chance of winning can be no worse than a certain value, regardless of what your opponent does. And this is a concept that can be a little hard to grasp, and for me it was hard to grasp until I happened to be watching some poker videos, and I happened to look into this stuff. I don't actually play poker, I don't really have a deep passion for the game, but it's good entertainment, and so I looked into it a little bit, and this was something clicked in my brain. It made a lot more sense for poker, and I immediately saw, okay, this also applies to RBY all of the time. So in poker there is this GTO thing, which is game theory optimal. So in poker they actually do have a perfect solution to whatever situation you're in. With each hand they've run the numbers, they know exactly how often you should take each action. Just perfect mathematical, like there is no arguing with this is the correct way to play poker. Okay, cool. So if you have memorized that entire table, if you play like a machine, like completely correct, what are you actually doing? You are taking money off of people who make pure mistakes. And what is a pure mistake? A pure mistake is, in Pokemon terms, it's when your opponent has a free Psychic and they're 100% clicking Psychic. The pure mistake is switching, for example, Tauros on it and then switching out. Like, it's just taking 45% of your Tauros for no reason. That's a pure mistake. Like a move that just never ever has any upside. That's a pure mistake. People make pure mistakes. New players make tons of pure mistakes. I got paired with a player who basically had no RBY experience in round 1 of Global Championship. I played him yesterday. He made a ton of pure mistakes. I played as safe as I reasonably could. And, I just tried to be as optimal as possible, and eventually he just gifted me his Snorlax and whatever, I won easy. But that's nothing special, being optimal in this way is only helpful against weak opponents who make a lot of pure mistakes. And strong opponents will also make some pure mistakes some of the time, but it's really rare. You cannot bank on this alone to carry you. Like if you play as close to optimal as you can and you make no further adjustments, I do not think you will have the top results in RBY. I simply don't think that is true, because what actually happens is that tons of people make mixing mistakes. And what is a mixing mistake? If the correct way to play is to bring Zapdos, let's say 25% of the time, I don't know what the actual number is, nobody does, but let's say it's somewhere around 25%. If you bring Zapdos to 50% of your games, that's a mixing mistake. And bringing Zapdos in itself is not a mistake, but you're bringing it too much, and other opponents can exploit that. And if you are playing optimal, then you shouldn't load more Rhydons to counter Zapdos, because that's not optimal. You are loading more Rhydon, that's not correct. But in practice, people do make mixing mistakes. People do have tendencies that are exploitable, and even at very high levels. And I found a quick example here. This is a one thing that really stuck out to me. It was a really glaring example when I was scouting for RBY World Cup. We played against Northeast. We played against Izza. Izza did this. He sleep powdered the Jinx. Okay, cool. What does he do turn after? He does not go Tauros. Okay. That's it. This is the thing that this is the mixing mistake that he does. Obviously, clicking Psychic there is perfectly fine. It's a move that you should click some of the time, maybe even a lot of the time. I don't know. But it's definitely incorrect to not go Tauros. To never go Tauros. You should often go Tauros to press your advantage. Even against a Cloyster, you have crit odds, you have para odds. You should probably go Tauros quite a lot of the time in that scenario. And let's see this game 2. This game 2, after he gets the sing off, he does go Tauros. So this surprised me actually, because the tendency is very much that after he gets sleep, Hypnosis on Executor, he stays to attack. Okay. He does this a lot. I've only picked up the last best of 3 because I didn't want to, cherry pick with, past replays or anything. But this was his latest best of 3. And I think if you pick any best of 3 that has ever played in the last year or whenever, which is what I scouted, you will find that so often display right after he gets sleep, he does not go Tauros. He does not press the advantage. He just doesn't do it. He does it, well, obviously he does it some of the time, he did it here, but he does it probably less than he should. And so, hi Izza, if you're watching this, should go Tauros a bit more often, I think, based on what I saw. Try to be mindful of that.
Okay, I am recording this afterwards because Izza's played one more best of 3 against Dragon for the finals of RBY World Cup. And in this best of 3, he did go Tauros immediately, here and here, 2 games out of 3. And so, evidently, either my original scout was incorrect, or he has immediately learned from his mistakes. But in either case, try to focus on the concept that I'm explaining here, more so than the specific example, because, this is one little thing that I thought I noticed, but evidently it's not completely true. And yeah, I mean, this is why the game is hard. You think you have a good read on someone off of 20 replays, and on the 21st they do something completely different. So keep that in mind too. Enjoy the rest of the video.
And if you are anyone else, realize that this guy is a really good player. This guy played SPL. This guy is generally considered to be quite high level in the tier. Not top of the top, not Serpy, not Troller, but very solid, invitational level, SPL level, whatever you want. And he still has a very egregious mixing mistake, personally. And I mean, you could do the same about me. I just brought up Izza because it was something that I had fresh in my mind, that I scouted recently. But I'm sure people have found similar egregious things about myself. And I think, funnily enough, one time I was told I have the opposite problem. From the other position, when I get left, I've been told that I stay in way too much to burn sleep turrets. And so people who do go Tauros every time after sleeping, they get a significant lead on me. That's something that I was told a few years ago, maybe 1 or 2 years ago. And I've tried to be more mindful of it since. And, the point is, people make these mistakes. Very good players make these mixing mistakes. And how you get an edge, I think, in a practical sense, in RBY, is not trying to see the matrix and the exact percentage, and you press this move 68% of the time instead of 60 because you are 5 degrees in mathematics and Nash equilibrium very well. I'm not sure what this accent is, but I think all of that it's theoretically correct, but it doesn't really matter because there is so much more to be gained by finding the errors in people's frequencies and finding how to exploit those. And the thing about RBY is that this game is so complex that what even is an incorrect frequency? Like, is 30% Zapdos incorrect? Is 15% Cloyster incorrect? Who the fuck knows? How much should you Jinx? How much should you Gengar? How often should you use Surf T-Bolt Starmie? Like, nobody has a precise number that is confidently true. And so, what is really important in RBY is in the builder and in game, working on trying to understand what the correct frequency even is. But it's not something that you should do so that you can then just stick to it. It's something that you need to understand because it allows you to exploit people. Like, basically, this prediction guide encourages you to be perfect, mathematically perfect, to the best of your abilities, and then it says, okay, this is the ideal way to play the game. But it isn't in practice, because it is theoretically, mathematically optimal, but it's not how you get the biggest edge from your understanding of the game. Like, if you understand that this table has these exact numbers, if God comes down on you and it tells you, in this situation, Blizzard is exactly 10, switch to Charizard is exactly -4, fucking whatever. Whatever this is, you have God-given knowledge that this is perfectly mathematically accurate. The best thing that you can do with this knowledge is not to stick to the mathematically optimal way, because you are not playing against robots, you are not playing against other people who have that same God-given knowledge. You are playing against humans who will make a ton more mixing mistakes than pure mistakes. And so what you should do is, you have this God-given table, you look at your opponent, you see how many mistakes do they make compared to this table. And you see, they flip powder too much. Okay, and then you adjust your strategy to counter that. And that's it. That's what this comes down to. It's not important to be optimal for the sake of it, because you are not. Well, it is important to be mathematically optimal where you can, but it only really makes a difference against weak opponents who will make a lot of pure mistakes. At a top level, in practical terms, everything that you do to work towards, being optimal, it should all be used with the purpose of exploiting unoptimal tendencies in your opponent. And so what you need to do is, you figure out that you should go Tauros 30% of the time. Great. Awesome. Worry about finding opponents who go Tauros way more or way less than that number, and try to exploit it, because everyone in this game makes tons of mixing mistakes. This game is way too hard for that to not be the case. Way too complex. People have glaring holes all of the time in their scouts, in their tendencies. How often do they scout counter? How often do they bring counter? And so on and so forth. You should not limit yourself to what this prediction guide tells you. You should not sweat over understanding these numbers and these letters, because it's not what practically gives you an edge. What gives you an edge is understanding the bubbles of inoptimality. And there's plenty of them all over the place. The game is constantly swinging. Zapdos was ranked 10 or 11 a couple of years ago, and now he's back to like 7. Like our understanding of the game is constantly evolving, constantly refining towards towards optimality, but it will never reach optimality. There will always be something more, because the game is just too complex. And so what you should do is try to find the optimal strategies. Yes. Have a good understanding of Nash equilibria. Sure, it helps. But what you should really do is find those mixing mistakes in people. Because this is how, well, at least for me personally, this is how I got to the top. I played 1,000 practice games with Troller, just loading random shit and figuring out, how to not make pure mistakes again. And that's definitely, the basics is not making pure mistakes. So that's good. But after that, it's how often, try to be unpredictable, try to make sure that you are not making big mixing mistakes yourself, and find the ones that your opponent is making. And that's what the game is all about at a high level. It's not really about, having the optimal Nash equilibrium. It just doesn't do anything. Like, this is a waste of time. Like, 22.2% of the time, what are you going to do? Go to random.org and run a number from 1 to 1,000 to see if you should click body slam or not? Like, no. You shouldn't do that. That's a waste of your mental energy during the game. It's just not. This guy, to me, I mean, it's great, and I appreciate that it exists. But I think it leaves a lot on the table, and hopefully this video gives you some context of what it's missing out on. And I do think, to its credit, I do think it mentions some of the things I've really stressed here. But you see that it's such a it's like one page in a 20-page guide. Yeah, and so yeah, like you see that it talks about generally our opponents are not perfect, they are deeply flawed half-wits. Like, this is true. It does mention this. Like, you're not going to be playing against opponents who are perfect, so you don't need to be perfect yourself. But I just don't think this is stressed hard enough. Like, this game is all about it's not about mathematical perfect understanding. It helps if you have the correct odds in mind all the time, but it's not a fundamental thing. Like, approximation gets you 95% of the way. Like, you don't need to know that this is minus 15 or minus 14 or minus 13. You just need to know that it's kind of bad. And you shouldn't click this, and I will do a lot, because the mixing mistakes are often so huge. Like, look at C-Town Scout and look at how much Zapdos there is. Like, that is just not correct. Like, I don't care that it works for him. I don't care that it's it's just plain to see that there is too much of Zapdos here. Like, that is not. Even with our limited understanding, those mixing mistakes are so huge, even in great player scouts, that there is just no point worrying about all of these minutiae. What you should do is, pull up a scouter, see the 45% Zapdos, and see, okay, maybe I triple ride on this guy all of the time, like, no matter what. And what ends up happening if you do that, of course, is that your opponent sees that you are unbalancing yourself, and counteracts you. And that's the hard part of the game, is that if you play exploitative, you are making yourself exploitable as well. if you load triple Rhydon into everyone with more than 30% Zapdos, someone could notice that, and someone with more than 30% Zapdos could notice that, and they will not load any Zapdos, and you will now have 3 stupid Rhydons against no Electrics. You know, everything that you do to abuse other players can be abused itself if the other person catches on. But those mechanisms are often so obscure, and they will often take way more than one best of 3 to emerge and to become evident for your opponent. So in short, don't be afraid to exploit. Don't worry so much about being optimal, because being optimal is not real. Nobody is optimal. Nobody will ever be optimal. Even Troller is really good. He's not optimal. Good luck finding his mixing mistakes. He's really fucking good. I don't know where they are. But they are there, and so if you want to beat him, the point is you should try to find those, and that's it. That's all you do at high level RBY, and hopefully this gives people a window into, like, you know, something. It's a sentiment I see a lot in Smogon when they play an SPL and they see that RBY's channel, and they always say, "Oh my god, RBY prep is so deep. They look at all the moves." Yes. This is something that you don't do as much in other tiers, because the scouts are so wildly different in other tiers that it's not useful to look at mixing mistakes in the same way. For example, this is done not sending Tauros on a sleeping Pokemon stuff. You just don't have the data to find out if someone is making that kind of mistake in other tiers, because they don't play best of 3, and because they don't load Tauros every game. Whereas we play best of 3 and we play with very similar teams a lot of the time. So there is so much more data, there is so much more that we can do to identify mixing mistakes, and that's why RBY prep is so deep. And if you are an RBY player who maybe feels like they struggle with prep, or they don't really have a good understanding of how high level prep works, hopefully this gives you a concept, because I'm not actually giving you practical examples here, because it's really hard to give practical examples. I can tell you 40% Zapdos is unoptimal. I don't even know how true that is. I don't know how hard it is, how unoptimal it is compared to a perfect player, because nobody knows. But yeah, I mean, the point is, if your understanding is better, it's more accurate, then you can exploit other people. And yeah, so it's just, I'm not telling you what that understanding is, because I don't have it myself. If I had the perfect understanding, I wouldn't be making a video about this. But yeah, that's kind of it. You should try to keep this concept in mind when you do prep for other people. Where are their mixing mistakes? Because the pure mistakes, people don't make a lot of them. Like, you will never find a high level opponent where you go, oh, this guy just throws a full Snorlax every game. Like, no, that's not happening. Like, nobody at a high level does that. And so playing optimal, it's good, and it's definitely it's good to know how to do it if you're laddering. It's good to know how to do it if you are playing someone with no experience, because they will make tons of pure mistakes and you will capitalize. But the real sauce, especially in tournaments, maybe not so much in ladder play, but in tournament play, where you have so much data on your opponent, the real sauce is finding a mixing mistake and exploiting it, and that is the concept that should drive your scouting, in my opinion, every time, because there is just so much that you can do against so many players. I mean, if you just scout ABR and then scout any other top player, one of the two is wrong. Like, factually, objectively, one of the two has to be wrong. It cannot be true that both of the approaches are optimal. But how do you find the exploitative edge against either ABR or Serpy? not many people have managed to figure that out. That's why they win so much. But if you are playing against them, then what you should do is ask yourself, what mixing mistakes are they making? What are they leaving on the table? Because they have very different styles and they cannot both be optimal styles. So there must be something. And even if your opponent is a very big name, even if they win a lot, there has to be something always. And, the weaker your opponent, the more you will find, but that doesn't mean that you will not find these kinds of flaws, even at a very top level. And I think Pokemon is just so complex that it will never escape being exploitative at a fundamental level. Like, it will just always be exploitative. It will always favor players who find inaccuracies and abuse them. And by inaccuracies, I mean mixing mistakes. I don't mean pure mistakes. And hopefully this concept is clear too, because that matters quite a bit. But yeah, I mean, I think this is basically all that I wanted to say. It's, focus on the mixing mistakes, because the pure mistakes, they don't exist at a high level. Your optimal matrix type of play, it will not raise your win rate very much. What you should do is find, this guy always hyper beams to kill what's in front of him, or this guy never goes Tauros, or this guy brings too much Zapdos, or whatever else. And there is so much in this game that you will inevitably find something. It's just, you need to have a very deep understanding to understand what that thing is and how much you can milk it for. But yeah, I mean, that's the game. That's Pokemon. I think I've dragged out this outro for way too long already, so I will end the recording. I hope that these concepts, I hope that the way I worded these concepts is helpful to you. Because those are not crazy ideas. Everyone does this intuitively, but I think there are some low-level players who are not aware of them, and they will gain a lot from becoming aware of them. And second of all, I think there are a lot of players who have an intuitive understanding of these concepts, but they don't have them formalized. And if you formalize these concepts, I think it can really, focus your scouting in a more productive angle. And literally for RBY World Cup, what I did is I made a document, I made a bunch of observations, and then I tried to point out what are they doing, what mixing mistakes are they doing. And the biggest one I found for Northeast was not going Tauros after sleeping. And so that's why I brought it up here. But it's really like there is so much that you can do. Like they were not bringing in Thunderbolt on Chansey nearly enough. Emma and Narwhal, for example, and those are just two more things that I found. And okay, they don't have Thunderbolt on Chansey. What now? That's the hard part. But still, that's what you need to do, because it I think surely everyone will agree intuitively that it is not correct to have 0 Thunderbolt on your Chansey. It just can't be correct. And so once you have that understanding, once you have that observation, then the hard part is, what do I do with this? But that is what you need to do to really get a lead. It's you find the mixing mistake, you figure out how do you exploit it, and you get a lead, and maybe sometimes that lead doesn't materialize because you get unlucky, but on the long run, that kind of approach will get you a lot of victories, and it will get you a lot more results in RBY compared to if you were to really memorize these formulas and whatever. And the math is not bad. Like I said, I said this several times throughout the video. All of this it's helpful. And it definitely comes into play in endgames, and it helps if you understand how all of this works. For endgame scenarios where there are not many possible moves, because once the possibilities restrict, then you can practically put this into account. But it doesn't really change your win rate all that much, I don't think, compared to someone who has an intuitive understanding but maybe doesn't sit down to make the fucking matrix every time. And so that's basically it. That's what I wanted to talk about. It's been on my mind. I wanted to put out a big rant about it. And hopefully it helps some of you. Hopefully, if you are I don't know if you noticed this Taurus thing already, and that's why you went to him against Ryzen. But be conscious of this and try to go Taurus more often the turn after you sleep. Because I see you doing this stuff a lot. You hypnosis the Executor and then you stay there clicking Psychic or Thunderbolt for like 7 turns. And there he wakes for free. Well, not free, but you know, you leave some win percent on the table when you do that. And so that's what you need to do. That's, if you're maybe work on that. If you are someone else, figure out those kind of patterns in your game and try to avoid them, and then do the same for your opponent. Figure out their patterns and try to exploit them. And that is all, I think. And the 40 minutes, that's more than long enough. Okay, thank you very much for sticking with this, and see you guys next week.